Hello, it's Clozapine Fit and Lean here again. In this video I want to go into ketogenic diets and how they can be apparently very successfully used in people who have serious mental health disorders. Okay, so what is a ketogenic diet? Okay, a ketogenic diet is basically a diet which restricts dietary carbohydrates usually to below 50 grams a day. When you restrict dietary carbohydrates, which are what we call a substrate for glycolysis, okay, once you are doing that, okay, you feed primarily off fats and proteins, and you deplete your body's stores of glycogen within your liver and your muscle tissue, is your body will now start to produce what we call blood ketones. So what happens is there's a metabolic process, okay, where basically free fatty acids, okay, are metabolized into blood ketones. Now, you may think to yourself, well, why are you doing that? Well, there's some interesting things that are at play. It honestly may be, okay, that it seems to be. Now, this is not a double-blinded RCT. We cannot draw big conclusions yet. But anecdotally, okay, people have taken up these ketonic diets to try and lose weight, the morbid obesity that's associated with clozapine, for example. And for some reason, these people, anecdotally I might add, had a resolution which was spontaneous in their mental health symptoms, namely schizoaffective disorder and treatment-resistant schizophrenia, so clozapine patients. Now, why might this be happening? Now, please, this is just theory. We don't know if this is scientific fact. We don't know if this is true. As I said, there's limited evidence. It's anecdotal, and there's no what we call gold standard. So no double-blinded, random controlled experiments, placebo, crossover, all this type of stuff. What may happen, as it's thought, is that in people who are unfortunately afflicted with schizoaffective or treatment-refractive schizophrenia, is there may be what we call a misfolding of what we call the GLUT2 transporter uptake complex called it's called GLUT2, okay, and it's supposed to sit on your blood-brain barrier. And what's this supposed to do is it's supposed to, in response to insulin, translocate out, and it's supposed to scoop up blood glucose through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. And unfortunately, it seems to be that if this doesn't work correctly, there may be an improper modulation of glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which may drive, schizoaffective or treatment-refractive schizophrenia. Okay, so that glucose being uptaken by that GLUT2 is not working. GLUT2 is just not working correctly. The uptake of glucose it's just not being managed correctly by these biological processes. So blood ketones, okay, do not rely on what we call the GLUT2 transporter protein complex, which sits on this blood-brain barrier. Okay, those blood ketones just get in there through that blood-brain barrier into the brain. And because of this, it seems to be theorized that it's thought that this, as a sidestep around this imbalance of glutamate and GABA, okay, which seems to normalize this otherwise faulty neurotransmission, and people just spontaneously resolve their symptoms. So, what else does it do? Well, it seems to be that people who are on, even though it's equal calories, people that are on ketogenic diets versus what we call glycolytic diets, seem to lose more visceral fat and fat in their liver. They seem to sensitize to insulin better. And also, it seems to be some people, I'm not sure if this is the correct statement to make, but it seems to be people on ketogenic diets, they hold more muscle at the end of the dieting phase than people on traditional glycolytic diets. So what's the drawbacks? Well, unfortunately, ketonic diets, or the ketogenic diets, are quite limiting in terms of what you can eat. So they're restrictive. Lots of things that in sort of Western society that you just sort of get from a takeaway or a coffee shop. These things are all usually carbohydrates. Okay, so a ketogenic diet is not very friendly in terms of living in a Western society. And also on top of this is quite expensive. And also, sadly, as well, there is how can I say, a reduction in terms of performance around explosive sprinting, weightlifting in general, these so-called glycolytic activities. However, one's endurance, is still preserved. So, how do we step around that type of problem? How can we, how can I say, step around the lack of ability to deliver explosive power? Well, there are things which I'm researching, which I want to try myself, which may actually sidestep this problem. So what else? It may be also coming into the next new year is I want to do a proper experiment on myself. So I want to use basically the so-called bulletproof coffee trick, where basically you get things like ghee, butter, and medium chain triglycerides and BHB. You stick this into a cup of coffee grounds, and you reconstitute it with boiling water, and you drink this. It gives you very little to no insulin response, and you are able to use these fats as a substrate for energy, and you can do things like fasted cardio this way without having a performance lag. And then you can go to the gym, for example, after having a meal or something like a couple of avocados with some eggs. You eat things like fatty cuts of meat. And as I said, I'm trying to find basically honest to God data. I want to see if my PAN score improves. I want to see what happens if we see, for example, a reduction of liver fat. I want to have a liver ultrasound done. I also want to see how, for example, under DEXA, how my body composition improves, not just muscle body fat percentage, but also, what happens to that dangerous visceral fat. And I said also what happens to that dangerous ectopic fat in your liver. These are all things I want to answer, because this looks like it could potentially go somewhere in terms of treating psychiatric patients that are treatment resistant with simply just diet and exercise. So I'm going to combine maybe a bit of fasted cardio, either LISS on the treadmill walking, or miss and hit on my bicycle. And as I say, I want to keep up with my weightlifting routine. Maybe limit the volume and sort of duration of the workout. Maybe do a 25-35 minute weight training workout, just enough to stimulate the muscle to keep it on me, as we basically drop the calories maybe into a slight energy deficit of 2,500. To see what happens, I say, to my body composition, mental health, metabolic markers, so blood lipids, all this type of stuff. So that's what we're maybe going to look at over the next new year, is ketogenic diets. Okay, just trialed on myself, and I just want to say N equals 1. Okay, doesn't matter if I have the ability to drop all my fat off, take all the fat out of my liver, improve my mental health. I look like a muscular god. Okay. With N equals 1, okay, you can't draw big conclusions. If it works, okay, maybe we could ask a hospital to try it on sort of willing volunteers in the hospital to see what happens to a larger sample size. But as I say, even if the results are drastic, you can't just say, well, everyone should try this ketogenic diet. Okay, so there we go, pros and cons. Okay, so clozapine, phytolene, signing out again, and kaboosh, there we go, bam.